All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. If I can figure out how to make these continue to turn, which has been a challenge today. Okay. So, hi, my name is Mandy Englert. I am the head of our higher education nonprofit sports and media division at Chicala. You may have remembered us as FFW. We recently actually were acquired by Chicala. Yeah, and it seems like a super eclectic, weird amount of things that I am head of, but they actually go together really well. A lot of brand loyalty, a lot of the same sort of problems actually across both of these, all three of these verticals. So yeah, and we see a lot of the same problems across all. Which I don't know why this Zoom thing has to be in my way. It's just gonna have to be a little bit in the way. It's okay. I can probably move it somewhere else here. Okay. Yeah, it's just like super on the slide and I didn't want that. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the only time it will disappear is when you actually need it. So when you're preparing to launch a product, I feel like a lot of times we go through our pre-launch checklist, right? So we're looking for backup solutions, we're activating SSL, we're doing our analytics integrations, critical bug errors. We're looking at all of these really critical pieces because they're the most critical things when we're going to launch a website. But, you know, the question that we often don't ask ourselves is, what if people don't like the product? Like, what if people can't use it? What if people are really having problems with it? And what we see is that editors kind of come into the product and they're saying things like, this is stupid. I can't make this work. You know, this is completely different than how I used to do things. This is really, really difficult. And this is stupid. I don't want to use it. Like, let's get out of this. And so what we see is that a lot of times we'll be launching this and we have editors that, you know, they start kind of positive, they're trying to make it work, but then over time they're hating the platform more and more and more. And usually it has something to do with training and documentation and just the fact that they weren't provided all of the necessary materials up front. And if they were provided them, you know, we didn't keep going back and hitting those. And, you know, as developers and as, you know, people who are launching websites constantly, it's really hard to keep up with that stuff. And it's really hard to keep remembering that, you know, the editor really matters here. So again, we see this quite a bit, and it leads us to a lot of really key challenges that we see across platforms after we launch. Just, you know, having that backlog that's full with maintenance tasks from editors that are trying to improve their experience because they have all of these issues and are having a lot of trouble like trying to figure out where to find things. It's harder to scale your web presence because now editors are pushing back. They're clogging up that backlog again. It's hard to get that operational efficiency in there because they're really saying, oh man, this sucks. Like, I don't even know if I want to use this CMS anymore. I want to use this other technology because I think it's going to be a lot easier over here. And it's, you know, and you start losing that stakeholder trust and support. And when you start losing that, you really have a challenge with your new platform because now, like, you're going to have trouble getting that ROI and getting people on board and continuing that support. So what we're going to talk about is just like ways to really kind of bring training and documentation in through your entire life cycle, like as you're going up to that actual launch of the web product. And I think a lot of times, you know, we think about this as an afterthought when those editors are not satisfied, when we're seeing that trend line starting to go down. But what we should be doing is really talking about this as early as discovery. So in that discovery process, we should really be looking at this and saying, hey, like, you know, this is important. We need to make sure that our stakeholders are on board and ready to use the platform. So one of the first things that we do when we're going into a discovery, especially when we know that we're going to have a complex system that it's going to have a lot of adoption, sometimes 200 plus editors, is start to look at like, what are your users' needs? Like, who are the users that you're actually working with? And I know this probably sounds really obvious, but it's just one of those things to kind of put that lens on. Like, you're going to have people who are really light users in the CMS, like people that don't have a lot of technical knowledge and, you know, are only using the system to just kind of like copy and paste content in, and they don't want to remember a workflow. They don't want to remember a process. They need a document to tell them how to do it and just press that edit button. Then you're going to have power users that are much more advanced, that need to know that workflow. They want to know every single little detail, and they want to know how to rebuild components and do every single thing that your system needs to be able to do. And then you're also going to have leadership. So leadership, you know, most likely they're not really in the system. Sometimes they're really just looking for reports on it, but they're likely to care about things that either your system can't do. That's usually the big one that I see, is that, you know, they're trying to figure out something that it doesn't do today and they really want that one thing. Or they're caring about like how it's affecting their team and their workflows, and trying to make sure that their team is able to actually be able to do the tasks quickly and effectively. So one of the things that we do during discovery processes, we'll usually have a workshop that is really specific to that editorial experience, where we'll start to talk about, you know, what do your users need? What are their workflows? And just kind of go through that content editing workflow. But as a part of that, we'll start to really identify some audience needs and what their skill levels are as well. And we find that that really kind of helps be able to build that training material down the road, but it also helps get to know your users overall. So we'll kind of define the roles that need to be in the system. There might be like 5 different roles and 5 different permissions. And, you know, what is that user going to be qualified to do? And what are the type of tasks that they want to do? Figuring out, you know, what is their technical understanding? And I usually use these kind of scales to really help me be able to like talk to stakeholders and really say like, okay, you know, where do you think your authors are on this scale? Do you think they're like never used a CMS before? Or do you think that like they're super confident and they're just going to need like super advanced workflows, and that's how they're going to be working with you? So I'll usually kind of go through a couple of these. I usually start with just technical understanding, flexibility need. Do they really just need like a content box on a page so that they can copy and paste their content in? Or do they need to have a layout builder experience with like what you see is what you get? So we're trying to figure this out for the authoring experience first, but I think it's super helpful to think about that authoring experience, but also think about that from your training and your documentation point of view as well. So it's one of those things that, again, if you do it in discovery and you start this up front, you're collecting this data anyway so that you can build the best product possible. So why not use this same information to help you build your training and your documentation materials? So when you're talking to some of these stakeholders, again, I think a lot of these can sometimes feel really obvious, but when you're going through that discovery process, you'll be thinking of, okay, well, what are their business goals and what are they trying to achieve? And how can I make sure that like I'm getting every prospective student in, and how can I make sure that I'm getting all of the information out there? But you know, when you're thinking about those things, think about how you can solve people's problems as well. And, you know, help them achieve their goals. Some of the things that I'll hear, you know, even just like kind of a goals and challenges workshop, is I'll kind of ask, you know, what are your biggest challenges? You know, what's wrong with the current site? And people will say things like, well, I can't get anything on my homepage. And for some reason, I have a ton of trouble just being able to get the right content on my homepage, and I need to be able to do that quickly. So now I'm hearing that as a challenge that I can put into the editorial experience, but now I can also build a training on that, because now that I know that that's a major challenge of theirs, and now that I know that that's a big problem and something that they absolutely have to achieve, I can build documentation and training targeted at that. So now my product, as soon as I launch it, they're saying, oh, it meets my need, because you're immediately solving that problem and you're immediately able to achieve their goals. So it's one of those things that, again, like, use the information that you're already pulling from your discovery process anyway, when you're going into that product, to be able to build out some of these training materials and be able to help your stakeholders be able to manage all of those major challenges that they're dealing with. And some of the trends that we've seen, I think, documentation and training has definitely become a bigger topic just over the last few years. I know us as an agency, like we see that a lot with just some of the more complex systems that we build. But I do feel like I see this more and more just in RFPs as well, just people really looking for that additional support. And some of the things that we've really been seeing, just varying audiences. People really want to have different modalities for the ways to train people. They don't just want one training session for everyone and kind of like, good luck, let's hope it works out. We're seeing that people really want to have more of a dedicated program around training. Targeted enablement, we're really seeing a set of use cases that come through. So again, that example with like promoting content to the homepage, that's like a really big one where we want to actually build that into a use case and be able to build trainings around those specific things, rather than just kind of going in and saying, okay, here's all of the documentation on each content type. Now we can actually take it from that content type and show them how they can build on top of that and actually be able to market their content over time. Knowledge bases, those we build a lot of like demo websites, I feel like too, just demo websites, starter kits, knowledge bases to kind of help people be able to actually understand documentation and be able to have like a really well-resourced, like self-service kind of environment. And then, strategic guidance. So, people are looking for those big picture strategies on how to maximize the utility. So again, like, I think a lot of times what we focus on is this is this content type, or this is this component. Let's make sure that we know how to do like a how-to guide on this one thing. Like, let's actually put that in this bigger context. Like, when are you going to use this component? Why are you going to use this component? How does that relate to the audiences that we talked about during discovery? So, and again, I feel like it shouldn't just be one person's job or be like an architect's job to write all of this documentation. I feel like sometimes when it comes up last minute, that's what happens is, I'm telling a developer at the end, like, good luck, write all of this this training documentation. And that's really not what it should be. As a team, like when you're launching a product, you should be thinking about this the whole way through and making sure that you're hitting all of those different needs that editors are really looking for. So once you kind of go through that discovery process and you're starting to really think about, what are the types of training and documentation and what are the types of things that you can do to help people adopt your platform, you can start to define those modalities. So I have a couple of questions here that I'm sure are probably small for people to read, but just like, are there tools that editors commonly refer to for documentation? Are they using like ServiceNow or something like that to actually look at documentation right now? Or are you going to have to create something brand new? So those are some of the questions that I usually start with, are like, are people going to look at Confluence if you put everything in there? Where do people go today? Like what structures does the university already have in place? Do platform users prefer self-paced learning? Do they prefer training? What are the things that, your authors are really going to look at? If you only have a team of 10 people that are using a platform, maybe you can do like a really heavy training with a couple of sessions with people. Whereas if you have 200 authors, you might want to be relying a little bit more on some of that self-service documentation and adding some trainings in there. So what common issues or challenges do platform users face? What onboarding materials should be available? And how is feedback utilized? And I think that's a big one too, that we often forget. I think a lot of times it's, documentation can be very set it and forget it. But what we want to do is be able to continue to get feedback from people, continue to understand how they're using your platform and being able to actually do the tasks that they're looking to be able to do, and use that feedback to improve the platform over time. And once you kind of start to define those modalities, and you have everything from that discovery phase, identifying your audiences, identifying what skills those authors have, what content understanding do they have, are you going to have to do all videos, are you going to have to do live training sessions, and just trying to figure out what are all of those different pieces. One of the things that we've really started to do, and I think it's really helped, is building in a documentation and training plan outline as part of like a deliverable that you're building as part of your product. So I've actually seen this quite a bit just in the university system as well, especially with some of our bigger like multi-site projects. We see a lot of times like Princeton and Harvard, which I have examples from both of them a little later on, where they're actually building out these big kind of training plans where they're saying, okay, this is how people need to interact with us. Here are the things that they need to be able to do. And then they actually kind of set up events around those items so that people can engage with them and be able to address those editorial needs on the spot. So I love this deliverable. I think it's just one of those like unseen things that, vendors and just like internal teams alike should be kind of relying on to be able to say like, from a developer perspective, these are the things that our authors care about. Make sure that like we're building processes that make these things easy to do, but also just from a training and enablement perspective, just making it easy to know exactly how to build that documentation once your product's built out. And these are just a couple of examples of just training topics and training plans that we've put together. So I just pulled two things from one that we recently had, promoting content to the homepage. So that was a big topic of conversation. That was a big challenge that our stakeholders had. So what were the things that I really wanted to show them about promoting content to the homepage? So I wanted to show, what types of content should be promoted, how to promote it directly from a content type, how to promote it from the content dashboard. So I'm kind of giving myself all of these notes up front. So now I know, okay, I'm going to have to build a documentation segment that's about promoting content to the homepage that has these details in it, because these are the things that the editors and different stakeholders really cared about. And then for the training modalities, I'll come up with different ways to actually be able to train people. So for this in particular, I might have a how-to documentation on just like how to actually do the task. But I also might have an FAQ to just kind of help them with saying like, okay, here's the type of content that you can promote to the homepage, and just kind of give them a quick like FAQ on just, these are the different types, this is why you would use it, and different things like that. Cropping and editing images, I feel like that's in every single training plan I've ever built ever, because it's always a stakeholder need. It is always something that comes up in every project. And it's one of those things that can be really difficult depending on what platform you're using. And one of the things that, all editors really need help with. So, I'll really go into the details there, like what types of images are supported, how to choose the right images. An aspect ratio cheat sheet is something that I usually give. How to crop and edit, and I'll refer to different training modalities there too. And the reason why I usually give more than one training modality is just that, all of these things sort of link together. And then that way, like if someone's looking in one place for cropping and editing images, they might find some of the information they need from the design system. And then, they might get directed to this other piece for the how-to documentation. So usually what I'll try to do is have a couple of different things depending on, what they're looking at. They can always find what they're looking for. So I'm just going to go through these four. And, there's a pretty wide spectrum of the different types of like adoption support that you can provide. So from the self-service side of things, what is the easiest to produce, reproduce, and scale is really that written documentation. So actually just writing everything out, making it as self-service as possible, all the way to like a knowledge base where you're really kind of going still self-service, but you're adding more modalities. Sometimes you're adding like training videos in there. You're adding events, things like that. Training sessions, which are much more guided. People can ask questions, be able to interact and actually see a demo live. And then on-demand support, where you are fully guiding a team. We usually call that like office hours, things like that, where people can kind of drop in and be able to ask really specific questions. I usually don't see that as much unless we're working on like a really big system with hundreds of authors that are going to be kind of involved in it. So the first one here, just written documentation. Again, this is really best for users who really need to regularly refer back. So that light user that we were talking about at the very beginning, they're not in the platform every single day. They don't want to be in the platform every single day. They really just want to know how to do this one task. So it's really helpful to have written documentation for like a light user, because now they can kind of go to the site or go to whatever repository, be able to find that one thing, be able to do that task, leave, forget about it, and then come back the next day and do the same thing over again. So it can be accessible by users on demand, which can be super helpful. It can be as long as you need it to be, which can be really like helpful when you want to have these really complex workflows detailed out. But the disadvantages here are that there's no interactivity. So a lot of users have different learning styles. In a university setting, we try to be as accessible and inclusive as possible. So, I usually try to ask that when we're doing written documentation, that we're also kind of adding other things to that as well, where we'll do maybe one training session or we'll do a couple of demo videos as a part of it. Because I do think it's really important to give people that interactive style and be able to let people kind of choose, depending on just the way that they learn. So that's a big disadvantage if you're only going to do written documentation. It's just that kind of like accessibility and just being inclusive to all of the different types of authors that you have. And then another disadvantage, just it might need to be updated in multiple places. And sometimes when you're kind of scaling and you're forgetting that you have all of this written documentation out there and you're changing a workflow, you do have to go back and change the workflow in the documentation. So that can sometimes be complicated depending on who owns the documentation, how you're scaling things, and how you're going about things overall. And one of the things that I like to kind of explain to folks as well is that written documentation doesn't always have to be just like, 40 pages of straight text. Sometimes it is, and I've written documentation that goes on for hundreds of pages sometimes, with no images. But normally what I'll try to do is I will have that written documentation and I will also support it with some sort of imagery to kind of help people be able to skim and scan and like try to find what they're looking for quickly. So one of the deliverables that we'll try to give is, when we build this component library and we're showing people, what every single component is, we'll sort of, put this in a Miro board and we'll put these little stickies on it that kind of say like, okay, this is a CTA button. This is that component. This is the hero banner item. And then that way they can really look at that page from a visual perspective and say, okay, here is that 50/50 image card. I know that I want to add that to my site. That's what I want it to look like. So let me go through the how-to documentation now on how to build that 50/50 image card. And they don't have to go searching through every single piece of documentation now. They know what they want to find, and now they can go into your written documentation and be able to say, oh, okay, now I can actually find this thing and be able to quickly edit what I'm looking for. So knowledge bases, again, this is kind of that extension of your written documentation. One of the biggest advantages I find with a knowledge base is the ability to add more of those modalities. So when you're just doing written documentation, it's usually, kind of that image sheet that I had, and straight text, whether it's in a document or if it's in, service tickets or some sort of like, Confluence or any sort of system like that, where a knowledge base, you may be putting that on its own website, on its own server. You might be just giving people like a way to actually be able to like refer back to things. So I really like using that for more training modalities and making it more of like a web experience itself from the training and documentation. I know a lot of us don't have time to build something like that, but when you have a super complex system, and like I know like web services and things like that, you guys have these huge like multi-sites, and it can be super advantageous to really have one of these training sites to be able to have all of these different modalities and just let people kind of make their own adventure, and be able to find what they're looking for, especially in these complex systems. The disadvantage, it does require regular updates. So again, you have to have a team or someone who's just constantly looking at this, constantly making sure that things are working regularly. And again, like if you're running a big complex system, it's likely you do have some sort of like program manager or product manager who's able to kind of help with some of that. But that's what I always find to be one of the disadvantages is sometimes we'll build out these knowledge bases and a year later, we'll be engaging with a client and they'll be like, well, of course we didn't update it. Why would we have updated that? And it's like, okay, well, let's go back to what some of these challenges are the editors are having and how much has changed in the last year and things like that. And when you're doing these knowledge bases, workshopping is a great way to be able to address a variety of user needs. I usually go through a pretty like distinct workshopping process to really kind of create a content strategy. Because again, if you're going to go that full knowledge base route and you're really going to like, hone in on all of this really like high powered written documentation, you want to make sure that you have like a content strategy that supports it. It shouldn't just be content type, content type, content type. You really want to put in all of your workflows. You want to show if you have more than one platform. I'm working on a site right now that, a series of sites that's Drupal and WordPress. So I have like documentation that's just for the Drupal authoring experience, just for the WordPress authoring experience, just about the design system and just about getting like, very specific support, which is really hard to see in this image right here. And I'm realizing now, but what we'll try to do is kind of workshop that out and try to build a content strategy where all of these things will be connected, but also we'll be able to kind of make them distinct sections and try to figure out, what people need in each topic and which area. And demo websites and starter kits. I know I mentioned this before. This is something that we see a lot with like some of the complex systems. I think actually Stanford has one for some of the SWS systems. I know like Princeton and Harvard, they do a lot of the same thing as well, where they'll have a demo site where they're actually updating constantly, like, hey, here's this new update to the content type. Let's put this on the site. Let's see what people think about it before we launch it live, on the main site. And it'll also provide people a demo. So when they're building out their site and they're trying to look at different content and different content types and things like that, they're seeing everything in one place right away. So then they can go and build their own adventure. So I always find that like a demo website, starter kits, especially when you have like a really complex system, can be just so extremely helpful when trying to get those pieces launched. So training sessions. So these are really instructor-led activities where, you know, it's good to have them so that you can kind of record and be able to show people, you know, how to actually do things and be able to, you know, alleviate some of that pressure that people are feeling as soon as they, you know, are looking at a new system and they're not feeling really confident in all of the documentation yet. Training sessions can be really good for just kind of ramping people up and getting them started as a good starting place. These are great for people who need that hands-on support, especially. And also, you know, being accessible, being inclusive, you know, you want to kind of see how much of your audience is going to need that sort of support so that you can have that audio and visual support. So I usually recommend at least a couple of training sessions, even for our smaller platforms, if not more than that. These are usually more engaging. That's like a really big advantage of them. The disadvantage, they are time consuming to put together. Typically what I will do with my team is kind of look at the written documentation first and take what I think is super valuable and necessary from the written documentation. And I will put that into slide decks and then kind of go through the slide deck and kind of a live demo on those couple of things. So, and again, that kind of goes back to your training plan. Like, what were those major challenges that people really, really cared about? And those are the things that you should start with in your training sessions. You know, you don't want to just say, okay, here's the event content type. Let's just go through an event content type. You really want to kind of help them understand when they will be using that content type and what are the type of things that you're trying to solve with that piece of content that you're looking for. And a good example of this, Princeton WDS, I think they do like a really, really good job of this. They offer structured, like instructor-led sessions every month. And one of the things that they really do is they offer like introductory sessions, and they also offer advanced sessions for their users. And I think they have over 1,000 websites on their platform now. So, you know, they have a lot of editors that are constantly coming in, and some of them know the basics, but they don't know how to do advanced stuff. Well, now they can come to a training session and just like look at that advanced content part or look at one advanced workflow. So, and they're doing that monthly so that people don't feel like they're missing out. But then also, you know, they're recording the sessions and they archive everything so that if people do want that self-service environment, they can go back to another video that had a lot of the same content, or they can actually attend a training session and kind of be live with the trainer and be able to get what they need out of it. And they have one of the best governed systems I've seen really in a long time, because it really reinforces all of the best practices of their platform and how they have all of those systems kind of connected together. And, you know, they integrate branding, they integrate guidance, they integrate all of these things as a part of that training session. So then people are kind of learning that as part of just that editorial experience. And the last one, just that on-demand support. So these are just live expert-led office hours. So this a lot of times doesn't have any sort of agenda at all. Typically, you will sort of have a trainer just sitting in the room waiting for people to kind of pop in. And especially when you just launch a product, we'll have a lot of people popping in and you will probably have a lot of questions with that too. But it's really good if you have distributed web teams like the Princeton example and Harvard and the SWS one as well. Like, you know, what we see a lot of times is that, you know, it's distributed web teams. These teams are all kind of decentralized. They're doing their own thing. It's really good to have these open office hours to kind of help them be able to ask questions and be able to, you know, build that confidence and learn more about things. It is a low barrier way to access expert support. So I think a lot of times people kind of say like, I'm gonna have to enter a ticket and then they're not gonna understand what the ticket says. And it goes through this whole long process where if they know that they can attend an office hour session, they might just attend that. It kind of lowers that anxiety level, and they know that they're going to trust the support that they get at the end of it. The disadvantage, it does require a dedicated team to kind of be able to help with this. You are going to have someone be able to kind of sit in a room and just wait and hope that people drop in for office hours. I had that when I was relaunching Analytics 360 at the institution I worked at. You know, GA4 was a huge topic of conversation. And when everything turned off for GA3, that's when everyone decided to come to office hours. I had office hours for weeks in advance. Not a person showed up. The day it turned off, everyone showed up. So, but it was good that I had that sort of structure already built and set up, because then people could kind of go back, and if they didn't get their question answered, I already sort of had a community set up with support, so that, you know, I was very overwhelmed with questions because I was one person in an office. So they were able to kind of go through and find what they needed. I like to use Harvard as an example of this. They're still really in the process of launching a university-wide platform that I think we have over 2,000 websites on it now. Still more to come too. And so they do these drop-in hours weekly. Just as new sites launch, they'll have another drop-in session where people can sign up right on their knowledge base website and be able to say, okay, I'm going to attend this event this day. I'm going to sign up for it. I'm going to go and be able to like find what I'm looking for. And it kind of has that drop-in format so that anyone can come whenever they want. They don't have to sign up. We want them to sign up, obviously, but if they don't, you know, it's not the end of the world. It has really encouraged a community feel. So one of the things they were really worried about was getting that huge backlog of editors saying, you know, we hate this, you know, this isn't going to work. But then what was happening was people were showing up to these office hours and saying things like, oh, okay, you know, this seems to be working for me this way, but could we maybe change this one little tiny thing? And if it was a small adjustment and everyone agreed in the room and were saying, yeah, that would actually be huge support, it helped them be able to prioritize their backlog too, and be able to say like, okay, this isn't just a one-off request from this one faculty member. They were able to kind of look at that from that bigger point of view and build out that community, and actually be able to scale their support overall. So yeah, and you know, when you're building all of this content out, I think it's really, really important to develop that content understanding. I think a lot of times, and I've been guilty of this as well, just sometimes we leave it to the developer at the very end of the project when they're going through their pre-launch checklist, and we're saying, okay, also write that documentation so this editor can do this. And they don't have time. Like, you know, that's not what's on their brain. That's not what they're really looking for. And, you know, we need to make sure that it's very clear and concise. You know, we don't want to use jargony words. We don't want to be talking about, you know, the HTML on how something actually comes together, or the Git repo or anything like that, which actually happened to me recently. I was having our architect work through stuff, and he had this huge Git repo documentation. I'm like, they don't need to know that. Please stop. Please stop talking about the Git repo. I just wanted them to learn about this, like, you know, this HTML piece. So, making sure that you're using really clear, concise language. Structured and organized content resources, you know, organize it in a logical, structured manner. Again, that's why that training plan outline, I think, can be super, super valuable, because it's helping you really outline where things will go, what modalities you're going to use, and how everything kind of connects together. Have visual aids. No one wants to look at hundreds of pages of documentation without images on it. I use Scribe quite a bit too, just to kind of help me get through that initial process. I think Scribe's like a really great tool that can kind of help you build that how-to documentation, add those images in for you. Have those use case scenarios, and establishing a support channel. Again, I think that's something that we don't always think about, because we're like, okay, let's do the documentation and let's never think about it again. That was terrible. We never want to do it. You really should establish a support channel because people are going to need support. They are going to be looking for more support throughout and just being able to get more from you. So establish that clear connection, get their feedback too, because again, you want it to be really clear and concise, and it's hard to do that when you're not getting feedback. So again, I think it's really important to kind of start this process directly from discovery, but also just throughout everything that you're kind of working through. When you're launching a new product, when you have a really complex system, like it really shouldn't be an afterthought. It really has to be a part of every part of the process. And you're already gathering so much information throughout that entire process. Like use that to your advantage. Like you're already gathering it, like put more of that in there. So the things that I really tell people to focus on, especially when they're trying to do this themselves and work through it internally, think about which training modalities will best meet your users' needs. Like who are your users and, what is going to work best for them? How will you build feedback loops into your training approach? So how are you going to let people communicate with you and have those regular opportunities to give you feedback? And then lastly, who will own the documentation and ongoing process, which is always a very big question because no one wants to own it, but somebody has to own it. So it's one of those things that it's a big question, and I think it's really important to answer even before you really launch your product overall. And that's it. So so I can take questions, and I'm not sure if there's any online too, but yeah.
The best way to learn something is teach it to somebody else. I wonder if you ever use any of your users to help you, develop training plans and write and documentation.
Yeah. So especially on the Harvard one that I've been working on, they really reach out to their stakeholders quite a bit. So as part of our discovery process, we really brought in stakeholders from different types of units. So they had different industries that they really go after. So there's some that's really informational, some that's really research heavy, biography heavy. So what we ended up doing was really talk to all of these different types of users and figure out what those challenges were. So then that way we could really figure out how we could implement that training. And now that we have a knowledge base, they've actually been doing a lot of user testing on the knowledge base itself to be able to kind of get that feedback and make sure that people understand it. And I think that's been really helpful. Now, of course, I don't expect like every team ever to do that because they're really going above and beyond, but I think it's really helped them roll out their system like much more strategically and making sure that people aren't feeling left behind because they just went through like a major migration, and yeah, it's been really tough. So that's probably the best example of that. Usually I will bring editors in like during a workshop, just myself. Like if I have like a core group of stakeholders, I'll bring 1 or 2 people in from like in a discovery session. I'm usually not super in the weeds with authors post-launch, but it does happen sometimes. Yeah.
Basic tips for this much not scale. So I find that we put all the energy in front end and it's perfect, and then these other features or forget to it's human nature that one of the best practices.
Yeah. So usually I will recommend like a platform roadmap. So on the knowledge base site itself, I'll usually ask that anytime that you have like a new launch going out, like new features and things like that, you're adding those things to your platform roadmap. And then every time those features launch, you want to be able to put like, hey, this was launched. And then from there, that helps serve as a reminder to like the team that's building the documentation too, like, hey, this feature's going out like next week, or like this just went out, I need to update this documentation. But it also kind of helps let your users know that you are like looking at this constantly too. So I usually start with just like a platform roadmap and kind of tell people like, put your next 2 months of like sprints on there. Like it doesn't have to be everything. I usually just start there and expand. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll second that. We do the same, we do exactly that.
Yeah, and I think that's helpful. Yeah, I think that can be super helpful. And
Yeah, it's just gonna say, they, yards don't get approved if they don't have test updates and documentation. Documentation.
good from the online part. All right, yeah. Yeah, so again, it kind of depends on the client, it kind of depends for me, just kind of on how complex the system is going to be. Like if we're using like really standard Drupal, I'm usually not like getting stakeholder feedback on it, because what happens is they'll want customizations, and we can't build in those customizations, and like it kind of goes into like the back and forth. Where I will bring people in is if I know that I'm going to have like a really large, really complex system, I'll probably bring people in to kind of say like, okay, how do you expect like layout builder to work in this way, this way, this way? A project that I'm on right now, we're using like layout paragraphs with Drupal, and the first time we built it, we just used layout builder. But the design system that we had created has so many like different like decision points and things like that. It made it impossible for a user to go through and use it. So when we were testing that user experience, we were kind of going through and we were like, okay, let's build out this documentation. We actually did a user test against the employer using it, and they couldn't use it. And I was like, well, if they can't use it now, like I can build documentation, but we're gonna have a pretty low success rate. Yeah. So we ended up like kind of pivoting and going back and saying, okay, let's do layout paragraphs. We have all these decision points. Let's see if that workflow works better. And we tested it just with like a couple of users. And then from there, because we saw a higher success rate already, we were like, okay, now we can build documentation on this, because yeah, because it's like, it's the right way and it's more sensible. Like, we don't want people to have to rely on documentation to do the product. Like, we want it to be intuitive, but then have the documentation so that they trust the product and that they like feel that confidence. So it's like, it's a balance for sure. Yeah.
I think that's it.
Right. It's like, it is, it's like, it's really an art for it. And that's why I really like having the training plan upfront too, because it helps my developers a lot of times. Because if I'm like, they really care about this one process, like they'll know to really like make sure that that's super user friendly, and they'll spend more time on that workflow, like customizing that, and then maybe not customizing the thing that they were really excited about that, the client didn't really care as much about. So that's why I really try to have that plan up front, because I think it can kind of help everyone for sure.
Any tips on nutrition? So you launch a project, you've got the fresh documentation, you've got, training, you've got the current set of users, and they're on board, ready to go, and then there's turnover. Maybe those are things, and then there's like changes in the procedures, and then you'll want turnover. And then things you spend time building, users forget are there.
Yeah.
And they end up not using them, get frustrated.
Yeah, it can actually do these things. Yeah. Platform roadmap, I think, can really be super helpful because it's showing that like your team is like constantly looking at it, and it's really making your team make sure that they're constantly looking at those things. But again, turnover, it's hard to stop. It's hard to, yeah, it's really hard to really like be a part of that. But usually what like we will ask is, when we onboard a user to a platform, I work a lot in Drupal. We do this with WordPress too, but anytime a new user's added, we'll kind of say, hey, user, you've been added. You get this email. Here's all of your training resources. And we kind of put it in an email to them front and center. And again, you're right, they do, they forget about it. Like there's turnover, they do those things. But as long as we're hitting all of the communication points that we can, that's usually all I can say.
I think what the question is. Yeah. So I have a hard one. How would every time? Is the FGC question. Guarantee that. It's a mindset. Oh yeah, this is one of the things. Yeah. All right, I'm sorry. So, it's like, hey, look, but now we're trying to build things out. Yeah, we looked those back 6 years ago.
Right.
But we never did. So, yeah, some of the products, it doesn't work.
Forget it. Yeah, it's definitely a hard one. Yeah, so Scribe, you can actually add it directly to your browser. And there's like a paid version of it and then a free version of it. But what you can kind of do is turn it on, go through the entire like training that you want to do. Just like, and it will video record every step in the process. And then you're like, okay, stop. And it will write out that documentation for you, and it'll have step by step, like, okay, you click here, and then you click here, and then you click here. Yeah, like while you're in, and it's any like product, so you can do whatever with it. In the browser, it's a little bit easier. If you pay for it, you can do it through the desktop too, and like, so really any product. In any really workflow, you can use it for. I do find the images, make sure that you add all text and things to it because it doesn't do any of that. So especially if you're putting it like in knowledge base, you can do all the text totally right there. And sometimes it'll be like, click here, and you'll be like, okay, well, that's not super restrictive. You're just showing the button. And if you have a visual, if someone who can't see that visually, you just need to write out the whole thing. So it's definitely not like a set it and forget it, but it can make things go so much faster. I use it all the time for, if I'm doing like component documentation, I use it for that quite a bit, because it's like, I'm usually doing like 40 components, and it's like, it can take forever, but it cuts my time down. Yeah, so you can have it generate a Google Doc. You can have it within the Scribe tool. I think the free version, you have to have it in Scribe. And you can access it. And then I think it will do other formats too. Yeah, so I was just saying, I've done like Google Doc and I've done HTML markup. And then just kind of transferred it into like a different website, but it's a great tool. I love it.
You're the one, just to make sure, like, an old checker email or something.
Yeah.
Like, take that out.
Yeah.
Send a letter.
Yeah, cause I have done that too, where I'm like, oh crap, there's like 15 steps in here, like. Yeah. Yeah, I think the demo videos can be super helpful. I try not to overload the demo videos because sometimes like if I have a whole page, I've noticed that like we've gotten user feedback that's like, I don't even know which one to click on. There's like 20 videos here. So what I'll try to do is condense them down to just like those main topics, like those complicated workflows. And then I just have people go to like training sessions and stuff for some of the other stuff, but yeah, I try to have a mixture of modalities because you just never know how people want to learn. Awesome. I think we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you.